Welcome back to Building Balance, the podcast where we help young men build fulfilling lives through self leadership, emotional growth, and intentional relationships. Today, I'm honored to sit down with someone who's helped many men break free from outdated definitions of masculinity, Dr. John Schinnerer. He's an expert in positive psychology, anger management, emotional intelligence, and men's mental health. He's also the host of the Evolved Caveman podcast and the founder of guide2self.com, where he helps men evolve into happier, more emotionally balanced versions of themselves. In this episode, we dive deep into topics that young men don't always talk about: anger, loneliness, love, and what it really means to be a strong man today. If you've ever wondered why you shut down in conflict, struggle to express your needs, or feel like you're constantly performing some version of a real man, this episode is for you. We're breaking down the man box and building something more honest and more powerful in this place. So let's get started. Thank you, Dr. John, for being on the show.
Thank you, Mohammed.
I've been looking forward to this one and we've been scheduled for a long time. So yeah, I'm really excited about this one.
It's going to be fun.
It's gonna be fun. No doubt about that. So okay, let's start with the root of the problem. But before that, I'd love for you to introduce yourself for our audience first. Yeah.
Oh boy, introduce myself.
Yeah.
I've been doing work with men in psychology for over 30 years. I've worked with some murderers. I've worked with SWAT. I've worked with special forces. I've worked with police, fire, CEOs, uber wealthy, everyman, um, in an effort to get them to embrace their full spectrum humanity over their constrictive masculinity. And I can explain a little bit more about that as we move forward. But I'm a really big fan of happiness and finding ways to increase our happiness and satisfaction with life. And it's my belief that the way that we're socialized as men undermines that, and that really frustrates me.
Yeah.
And so I've spent a career trying to help men to evolve beyond the man box, the way that we're socialized,
Yeah.
and the way that we learn the rules about what it means to be a real man, so that we can have more fulfilling relationships. We can have happiness and satisfaction, not only at work, which we're pretty good at, but more importantly, at home.
Yeah. 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 And that's so important. And then a lot of people do not realize that it's just they take this part for granted, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So okay. So let's start with the root of the problem. So how
Okay.
did we get here? Like where we are?
Well, it's a fascinating question to me, and I referenced the man box earlier. And the man box is a phenomenon that we uncovered in the 1980s. And Paul Kivel was in Oakland working with African American teenagers who wouldn't engage in their own academic achievement. They weren't into education. And he got frustrated. So he just started asking them, what does it mean to you to be a man?
Mm.
And since then, this question's been asked many, many times of many, many different men. And there's themes to it. There's rules to what it means to be a man. And the rules are things like don't back down, compete, be aggressive, assert yourself. You're only as good as your last achievement, dominate women, be the provider, be stoic. In other words, don't feel, be self-reliant.
Mm.
And, there's some good and there's some bad in there. And there's even some good and some bad within some of those individual ideas, like be self-reliant, right? If you think of self-reliance on a 1 to 10 scale,
Mm.
I don't want to be a 1 on that scale where I'm dependent upon everyone else for anything I need,
Mm.
nor do I want to be a 10 where
Ah.
I cannot ask for help even when I need it.
Yeah.
And I've seen some pretty extreme examples of this, like men in really some physical discomfort, broken bones, like concussions, depression, anxiety, and they just won't ask for help.
Mm.
And so, I think we got to become more nuanced in our thinking about these rules and ask ourselves, where am I on a 1 to 10 scale?
Mm.
And where do I want to be? What serves me best in terms of my happiness and success?
Yeah.
Because I don't think we give much we're not very aware of these things, and nor do we put much thought into it.
Yeah. Maybe because of the way we were taught, like socially, what was normal, what has been normal, uh,
Hmm.
um, uh, yeah, pictured, seen as normal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and research shows that this socialization process starts really young, as soon as we get into groups of boys at 4 or 5 years of age, and we police ourselves, and then it's exacerbated by movies, social
Yeah.
media, books we read. I mean, think of all the action heroes in every movie you've ever seen. Pretty much, they've got the emotional range of a grasshopper,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. I love those movies, but I think we got to realize, what are the messages that I'm taking in about being a man
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
And is this really what I want? Because one of the things that we know is happiness is about connection,
Yeah.
largely. It's
Yeah.
about relationships.
Yeah.
And that's come out of the 80-year long longitudinal study at Harvard, the adult development study. And, George Vaillant, who headed that study up for many years, said, look, happiness is about love, full stop. It's about connection.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that part gets left out of our socialization. We're not socialized to be relational. We're not socialized to turn towards
Mm-hmm.
other people. We're socialized, I would argue, to be more individualistic.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I'm an island, I'm a rock, like I
Mm-hmm.
could do this all on myself, that's never going to be true. We don't do anything alone
Yeah.
because we are interconnected and
Yeah.
interdependent. But anyways, so I have a problem with the self-reliant piece to a point. I have a bigger problem with the be stoic piece.
Okay.
And be stoic translates to don't feel,
Mm-hmm.
be cool, don't show any emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And when, at least in the US, when we're growing up, if we show too much sadness or fear in front of others, we'll get one of the following insults. And forgive me, I'm going to throw some slurs out there. I apologize in advance, but I think it's important to talk about. And it's the words change, but the meanings don't across cultures for the most part. And so if we show too much sadness or fear in front of others, we will get insulted, usually by another boy or young man. I've also seen it from women, young women as well. But you'll get something like, dude, don't be such a pussy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be a little bitch, or don't
Mm-hmm.
be a little girl. And the message there is don't be feminine. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it takes getting those messages that many times, 4, 5, 6, before we're like, screw that. I'm never showing that again. I'm shutting that part of me down.
Mm-hmm.
And you jump back in the man box. And then on the other side of the emotional spectrum, on the positive side, if we show too much joy, love, romanticism, excitement, flamboyance, we'll get the insults of don't be so gay or don't be a fag.
Mm-hmm.
And the message there is don't be homosexual.
Yeah.
And again, we'll jump back in the man box. And so we shut down these big aspects of our humanity because we're human before we're men,
Yeah.
I would argue.
Yeah.
That, there's a whole full spectrum of humanity available to us. And in order to be quote unquote real men, we cut off parts of our humanity in order to fit into this box.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question then becomes for me, to what extent or what emotions are available to us without fear of humiliation? And I would say it's more or less three things. I'm sure there's some exceptions to this, but the big ones to me are lust, because if I talk about how good looking this woman is and how I'd like to sleep with her, that's safe because it indicates I'm heterosexual. There's stress, because if I tell you, Muhammad, oh my God, I am so stressed today, it says I'm busy, I'm important, I matter. But the biggest one to me is anger, some degree of anger, irritation, annoyance, frustration, up to anger, all the way up to rage. And most of our emotions, I would argue, get funneled or channeled through that anger lens. And we know that anger is often a secondary emotion. We know that anger quickly, like a third of a second quickly, follows on the heels of emotions like embarrassment, guilt, shame, anxiety, and fear. And we know that depression in men shows up as irritability. Let me say that again for those listening. Depression in men shows up as irritability and impatience, an externalization of blame. And so it creates this problem because the anger dynamic is such that it cuts us off from any possibility of us evolving or learning or looking at ourselves and saying, what's my part in this dynamic? What do I need to work on? What do I need to change? Instead, we're externalizing blame onto the other person and saying or thinking, if this person would stop being such a fill in the blank, I wouldn't be so angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the the extension of this, or the conclusion of this, is the biggest complaints I hear in doing couples counseling for many years from women is, I can't connect with my husband. And my internal response is, yeah, no shit. Like, that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
We're not socialized in that direction. We're not socialized to be relational. We're not socialized to know what we're feeling. We're not socialized to be great in communication
So,
and relationship. And the reason I love this idea is that I can tell men honestly, look, it's not your fault. You didn't ask to be socialized like this. It just happens. But the caveat to that is, I would argue it is our responsibility to evolve beyond it,
uh,
to learn to embrace our full humanity and all the emotions available to us, because they all exist for a purpose. They're all messengers,
yeah.
with the exception of shame. I don't know why shame exists. I can make arguments for that, but it's just a shitty emotion. Anyway,
So,
because shame tells us we're unworthy of love, connection, and belonging. And I don't know of anything that makes us unworthy of love, connection, and belonging.
yeah, but if you put that definition to it, but what if somebody actually isn't it a part of self-awareness where you know you've done something really shameful and then you feel shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
uh,
see, I think I would make a distinction between shame and guilt. And I'm all for guilt.
okay,
I'm not all for shame.
okay,
I
okay.
think shame is kind of the snake in the grass that hides in the shadows, that lies to us and makes us want to withdraw from humanity or a relationship, thinking that we are unworthy of
Yeah,
connection.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas guilt, if I wrong you, and I'm appropriately guilty, guilt causes me to withdraw, think about, what did I do here? Like, what did I say that was hurtful? And then there's a boomerang effect. So it causes us to come back. And then I would apologize to you, ideally, and say, Muhammad, I'm really sorry I said that. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. That was thoughtless of me.
Yeah.
And so guilt, I'm all for guilt. Shame, I think, is another beast entirely.
Makes sense, makes sense, makes sense. So
Because guilt is I did bad. Shame is I am bad,
yeah, yeah,
simplistically.
yeah, yeah. And in a way you what do you say, you train your mind in shame, you train your mind that there's no going back from this, but in guilt
Hmm.
you can, do self correction and do something about
Right.
it, right? So okay.
Yeah. So guilt is healthy to me. Shame's unhealthy.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, so when we come to so we've talked about the different emotions so far, but many men feel stuck between wanting to evolve and fearing they'll lose their strength or identity. So how do we begin to shift that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember I was talking to a guy years ago, and I was trying to get him to become more emotionally aware, get more comfortable with all of his emotions. And he told me that he was afraid because he felt it was like a scab. And if he scratched the scab, it would start bleeding and it would never stop. So, in other words, if I start crying because of all the shit I've dealt with in my life, I'm never going to stop if I access that part of myself.
Mm.
And I get the fear. The fear is pretty common, and it's not true. Like, emotions are time limited. Most emotions are meant to last about 3 minutes, give or take. And I
Okay.
think we do a great job sometimes of extending those. And then there's moods, and moods are kind of diffuse emotions that may or may not have a cause that last longer. But like, I mean, even grief, like, all emotions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like going through a tunnel. And the problem is that maybe it's the opportunity that we have to go through the entire tunnel. We have to have the courage to go through the tunnel and feel what we're feeling. Then we get out the other side, and then we can let go of that emotion. We get the message that it's trying to share with us, and we're good for the most part. Typically what happens though is we get halfway through the tunnel and we're like, oh shit, I don't like this, or this is scary, or this is uncomfortable, or I'm afraid it's never going to end. And we turn around and go back out the way we came in. And then we've just suppressed it.
Yeah.
We've just swept it under the rug. And, any emotion that we sit on or suppress, eventually it's going to come back louder
Mm.
and stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. And even before this, like this is, I would argue, This is the second stage. The first stage for many people is denial. People don't
Hmm.
even acknowledge that, right? What they're feeling, uh,
Right.
what they need to face, right? And
Yeah.
it's and part of it would be like when you share, like if you have to, we all have a baggage, we all have an upbringing, a society we were brought into. We have definitions of everything. We have definitions
Hmm.
of how we're supposed to be, and then depending on who you follow on social media, the definition of manhood is different, because yeah, there are Andrew Tates, there are
Hmm.
different people, so you get the idea. So the different
Yeah.
definitions, right? So, how do we get to a point, that transition, where we, you talked about going into the tunnel, right? But that first step, that where we need to acknowledge that, okay, just take a pause, something is wrong, right? We are trained to just go, keep working, keep living our life the way we are living. Whatever is happening, we are dealing with shit, and then we're just going on with our lives, right? But
Yeah.
how do we take that pause and start this process?
Well, I think, the first step's always awareness. And that's why I like the man box idea, because I've looked for years of how can I speak to men in a way that they don't get defensive, they don't shut down, they don't feel attacked, that they can consider what I'm saying and go, yeah, that fits with my experience for the most part. And gee, how's that impacted me in my life? And I really like there's research by Tasha Eurich who found that 95% of us will report being highly self-aware. So aware of our thoughts, our emotions, our impact on others, how others see us. There's internal and external self-awareness. Anyway, when in fact, her research shows it's about 12 to 15% of us only that
And
are
we
self-aware.
90% of us claim that we are self-aware.
95%.
95.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's a huge problem.
yeah.
And because we have this illusion that we know ourselves,
Yeah.
we know why we're doing what we're doing. We know what we're thinking for the most part. We know what we're feeling,
Hmm.
but we don't.
Hmm.
And so I think to start from that place of beginner's mind, of curiosity, of non-judgment, of giving yourself permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling,
Hmm.
not as right or wrong, but simply as human. And then asking yourself, I mean, first it's even to back up before that, I would say it's getting out of your head, your attention out of your head and into your body so that you can begin to tune into what are the physiological sensations that are coming up for me right now? And how do I overlay that onto what I'm feeling? So in other words, or for example, um, gee, right now my chest is tight. Am I getting anxious? My throat is constricting. Am I nervous? My blood's boiling. I'm getting warm. Am I angry? Am I getting angry? Am I starting to get angry? Where's the blood flowing in my body? To my arms, to my hands? I mean, anxiety and fear will cause blood flow to go to the arms and legs to run away. Anger will cause blood to flow to the hands and feet to prepare you to attack.
Oh, never knew this.
Sadness, yeah, sadness causes the blood to stay more internal in the trunk because sadness is keeping you close to home after you've suffered a loss in order to allow loved ones to take care of you and nurse you back to health.
Okay.
And so that idea of where are we putting our attention, because most men over the last 30 years that I've worked with highly over identify with the thinker, the thoughts in their heads. And I'm here to tell you that Rene Descartes really screwed us when he said, I think, therefore I am.
Hmm.
That essentially cut off head from body. And so it disallowed mind body connection. And we are all about mind body connection.
Hmm.
There's no way to disconnect one from the other. And we are
Hmm.
far more than the thoughts in our head.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so to be aware of that just as a foundation and to start getting curious about what's going on internally in my body and how can I figure out how I feel from that. I mean, one of the easiest exercises that I love is simply stop and ask yourself 3 times throughout the day, what am I feeling right now?
Hmm.
And you just take a deep breath, pause, do a body scan, kind of figure out what's going on in my body and maybe assign an emotion to what's going on. Now, the great thing about the research from this exercise is the answer doesn't matter.
Okay.
What matters is the practice of stopping, asking yourself the question, doing a body scan, and just pondering what is going on internally? What am I feeling physiologically? That's the beginning to emotional self-awareness. And
And
then I would say, other tools like mindfulness become a big part of this as well. Just stopping, not being a human doing for 5-10 minutes,
mm,
becoming a human being and tuning into what are the thoughts going through my head and can I just observe them? What are the things arising in my body and can I observe them without judgment?
mm. This is
So
this
those are two of the ways I would start.
this is great advice. Didn't know about either of the things, and how blood flows in different emotions, and then the where if we could pause and the physiologically it can tell us what we're feeling, so
Hmm.
the reverse of that. So beautiful, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so now you've touched upon a little bit about anger. So one of the some of the emotions that scare men, right? Anger and vulnerability, right? So
Yes.
why is anger such a dominant emotion for many men, and what's really going on underneath it?
Anger. Well, first of all, anger is an important emotion. Like we're not trying to get rid of it. Like I've taught anger management for 25 years
Okay.
and the goal is not to eliminate anger.
Okay.
The goal is to feel anger, get the message. And the message is usually something like someone's crossing a boundary of mine, someone's mistreating me, something's happening where I need to speak up and assert myself.
Yep.
Um, However, we often fuse anger, the emotion, with how we act when we're angry. And so the emotion and the behavior are two different things.
Okay.
So I can be angry and begin to become aware of it and think, wow, I'm like at a 2 or a 3 on a 10-point scale of anger intensity. I'm getting annoyed. Like, what's going on around me? Why am I getting annoyed? And how can I speak to that?
Okay.
For example, like, this didn't happen, but Mohammed, I would really appreciate it if you were on time for our 10 o'clock appointment,
Oh,
something like that.
okay.
So I can be annoyed and I can speak to it.
Okay.
But typically what happens is we fuse the emotion, anger with our behavior because it happens so quickly. And again, like a third of a second that we get angry. We're not aware of it. And before we know it, there's a hole in the wall.
Mm.
And we're like, wow, how did that get there? And someone's
Yeah.
like, you punched a hole in the wall. Oh,
Mm.
damn.
Mm.
I mean, I've got that many, many times. And so I think anger is scary because it can get out of control. And when it gets out of control, we say and do things that hurt other people and ourselves. But the flip side of that is anger it's empowering, it's energizing, it's addictive. It feels good because when I'm angry with you, I'm all right in my mind. I'm 100% correct
Mm.
and you're wrong. And
Mm.
all I'm trying to get you to do is understand how right I am so that you apologize and say, oh my God, John, you are
Mm.
so right. I don't know
Mm.
what I was thinking,
Mm.
but you know how often that happens?
Yeah.
Never.
Mm.
And then the other, as I mentioned before, the real problematic part with anger is it cuts us off from introspection and growth. Because if I am angry frequently at other people, or especially when people give me criticism or feedback, then I externalize all blame onto them and I get defensive. I never look at myself and ask myself how I can
Mm.
improve, how can I change? And that's a terrible dynamic.
Yeah. And uh, what I'm thinking, so while you were saying this, some people came into my mind that I know of, and I'm thinking about what goes on in their minds. So how can a man begin to express anger in healthy ways without shutting down or blowing up?
So the first, it's a great question. I mean, and the first part is again awareness, and I think things like relaxation exercises, so body scans, meditation, mindfulness, deep breathing, like there's a number of things you can do
What do you mean by
to,
is sorry to interrupt? Well,
yeah.
just so we understand you, but what do you mean when you say body scan?
A body scan is kind of similar to what I was talking about with the earlier exercise I mentioned. It's where you put your attention in
Uh,
different parts of your body. Like you can start with your feet, Move up to your calves, move up to your thighs, groin, abdomen, chest, arms, and face and neck, and just see where's there tension? Where do I notice things? Where am I getting a flutter? Where am I getting a tickle, a ping, a twinge? And just so scan your body and see what's going on there. Because part of this is we got to get better physiological awareness in the moment or bodily awareness. It's a skill called interoception, a sense that we have.
Hmm.
Interoception is our awareness of the workings of our internal organs.
Okay.
And it's a sense that we don't really talk about, nor are we taught about, but it's there and we have to exercise it like a muscle in order to get better at it.
And while we're at it, so it would help our audience a lot if you could just give us an idea what sort of tensions translate to what. Like, for example, if I have
Oh,
tight
okay.
muscles, what does it mean?
So normally I would say constriction in the throat, dry mouth. I'm trying to, now this is anxiety, stress, fear
Okay.
in my mind. So constricted throat could be tightness in the chest, could be a tight jaw, tight shoulders, dry mouth, rapid heartbeat.
Okay.
Those are anxiety, fear, stress,
Okay.
and to differing degrees. Anger also can be a increased heart rate. Cortisol gets dumped in the system. It's the stress hormone, but it's preparing you. It's energizing, and so your body will often get warm. As I said, the blood flow goes to your feet and hands. Your face can change, so you get a scowl on your face. You
Mm.
overfocus on negative thoughts. Some people get muscle tension in their fists, like your hands will ball up into fists. I had one man tell me that he gets tension or tightness in his forearms. Now, I don't get that. That doesn't mean it's wrong because
Mm.
some of this is individual, but that's why you want to start looking at what are my tells? What are the bodily cues that I can tune into first
Mm.
that tell me I'm starting to get annoyed? Because if you think of anger intensity on a 1 to 10 scale,
Mm.
where one's calm, five's angry, and 10 is incredible Hulk enraged,
Mm.
you want to get on anger before you get to a five.
Okay.
Because once you go past a five, I would argue you become anger. Like your
Okay.
rational mind jumps out the window and you are gone
Okay.
and you just give in to anger at that point. And so the next part of anger is, you know, it's said that anger is often a secondary emotion, which means that it follows quickly on the heels of another emotion, like a third of a second quickly.
Mm.
And so one of the questions I'll ask myself when I'm getting upset is, what's underneath my anger?
Mm.
Now, sometimes it might just be anger, but a lot of times for me, it's like someone hurt my feelings.
Mhm.
Someone said something that was disrespectful.
Mm.
Could be anxiety, could be fear, could be stress, um, could be a gradual accumulation of stressors,
Mhm.
could be guilt, could be shame, and could be depression,
Mm.
which again comes out as impatience
Mm.
and anger.
Yeah.
And it once you can get to that point of like, oh, I'm getting angry. What's underneath my anger?
Mm.
Oh, just hurt my feelings, and then I can speak to that. It's a far different conversation if I say, to my wife, how come you're always on me about how I fill up the dishwasher?
Mm.
Why can't you ever just stop nagging me?
Mm.
Like, so that's going with my anger, right?
Mm.
Versus if I can speak to the more vulnerable emotions beneath the anger, it's a far different and a far better outcome. So, hey, honey, it hurts my feelings when you criticize how I empty the dishwasher or how I stack the dishwasher.
Mm.
Can you just let me do it my way, please? There's
Mm.
there's no right way to do the
Mm.
dishwasher.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
The dishes are going to get cleaned
Yeah.
ultimately, regardless. I promise.
Yeah. 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 And the way, so something yesterday happened like this at work, where both the parties were right, and then they just couldn't frame it, say it in a way that the other party could understand, and both were right.
Yeah.
So they ended up,
Yeah.
what happened, they left the topic and they moved on. Yeah, um before we go, just to get the answer to the previous question that we went away from, was how can we, in a healthy way, You just mentioned this, a bit of this, that we can express this. Like one way is this, the way you just said, but in extreme cases where you are at, as you say, above five on an anger level,
Mhm.
above five, where what do we do in that case?
Well, I think in those cases, the best thing and the only thing that is your goal in those situations is get out of the situation and calm down.
Like leave,
And,
leave.
well, I mean, like I'm thinking of the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, they just wrote a book called Fight Right, right? And they're experts in sort of relational dynamics and in particular relational arguing or arguments in relationship. And they say when you're in a knockdown drag out fight, your only goal is to calm down. And why is that? It's because when you're really in an emotional state, a highly intense emotional state, you're not listening to anything the other person's saying, and
Mhm.
everything's going to be distorted,
Yeah.
and you're going to say something that's hurtful.
Mm.
And so far better to find a way to disengage from the situation, to say, hey, I'm getting triggered. I need a timeout, and to go away. And it takes at least 20 minutes to calm your physiology, according to research. And that means 20 minutes not focusing or over focusing on what you were just arguing about.
Okay.
Um, and, I think, Aristotle said a couple thousand years ago that the easiest thing to do is to get angry at the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong manner to the wrong degree.
Mm.
And that still holds true. And so what we're trying to do here is to express our anger in the right manner to the right person to the right degree or intensity and in a way that's constructive.
Yeah.
And so to really, I'm trying not to go above a five
Mm.
anymore in my life. I don't always succeed,
Mm.
but my goal is to stay below a five and to notice when I'm getting just annoyed or irritated and speak to that. And there's other pieces to that. For example, I would say that we each have two buckets of emotions in us, metaphorically speaking,
Okay.
a bucket of negative emotions and a bucket of positive emotions.
Okay.
And typically what we're doing is we're focusing on, and this is what psychology has done for 100 years, is let's focus on the bucket of negative emotions, anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, anger, sadness, and let's see how we can empty that bucket out. And
Oh.
that's a worthy goal. Like that's
Mm.
worthwhile.
Mm.
But we're often going around with that bucket of negative emotions full up to like a 8 or 9 on a 10-point scale,
Mm.
which means we don't have much room before you add a couple more drops to it. It overflows. I go volcanic and I
Mm.
start yelling at someone who doesn't deserve it. So one of the goals is to empty out that bucket and work on that consistently. Like that's an ongoing
Mm.
practice. The other goal though, is to fill up your bucket of positive emotions, because the positive emotions act as a hidden reset button for the
Mm.
physiological symptoms of negative or uncomfortable emotions. So, for instance, when our heart rate goes up because of anger, when our throat constricts, when our chest gets tight, when our jaw gets tight because of anger or anxiety or fear or whatever it is, a positive emotion, think laughter, undoes all that. It brings our heart rate down. It undoes the cortisol in the bloodstream. It relaxes the muscles. It opens us up to new ways of thinking.
Okay.
And so the more that we can focus on cultivating conditions in our life on a daily basis for positive emotions, the more we fill up that bucket, the more resources we have
Mm.
to combat things like anger.
Mm. So, would it be right to say that we have to regulate these both positive and negative emotions continuously, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got to be aware of them ideally.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that I'm a fan of is looking for ways to create more frequent positive emotions in
Mm.
men's lives. And
Okay.
so, for instance, when I was younger,
Mm.
I used to think of happiness as something that would happen when something big happened, right?
Ha.
Like when I graduated high school with honors, or when I got a new car, or when I got a new job, or when I got married, or when I
Mm.
had a kid.
Mm.
And those are all very happy events.
Mm.
The problem with them is they don't happen frequently enough.
Mm.
I can't deal with happiness once every 4 years or two
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
That's not enough.
Mm.
And so, to look for things that lead to awe or wonder or
Mm.
curiosity,
Mm.
relaxation or contentment or passion. These are all things that fill us with small drops of positive emotions. For instance, there was a great study I liked, and this was back in like the 70s, but they looked at what was our positive emotional boost that we received from something very small, like finding a quarter on the ground, or from getting a gift of 3 Hershey's Kisses. And what they found in research is we got a positive emotional boost that was big enough to create several positive health outcomes, such as more creative thinking, more accurate thinking, better mood, more resiliency, more creativity. And that's just from a little tiny positive boost.
Mm,
And I love thinking about it that way, because if we can wrap our minds around that, and for instance, just when you go outside, appreciate nature,
mm,
like look at the trees, look at the sky,
mm,
appreciate
mm,
the grass,
mm,
all that's doing for us in terms of generating oxygen and creating an ecosystem where we can live.
mm.
That's awe, for
Yeah.
example. And so it's cultivating these little practices on a daily basis that are additive and cumulative in their effect.
And the would gratitude journaling help with this?
Yes. Yeah, gratitude's a great bang for the buck, in that it's one of the easiest and quickest ways to cultivate positive emotion, to
Yeah.
look at like 3 things that went well today, or 3 things that you're grateful for, and to really look at what are some different things each day that I'm grateful for. Like, you don't want to
Mm,
just say, I'm grateful for my wife every
mm,
day,
mm, mm,
because what happens is we get habituated to that. We get used to it. It doesn't have an impact
mm,
on us
mm,
anymore.
mm, mm.
But you can be grateful for little things about your wife, characteristics, strengths,
Ah,
things she does, and, vary it up. And then I think there's layers of gratitude. So there's gratitude for the really obvious stuff in our lives. Like, I'm grateful for the house that I live in. I'm grateful
mm,
for these clothes. I'm grateful
mm,
for my
mm.
family.
Ah,
And then there's gratitude for less obvious things. Like, I'm grateful for the ability to breathe on my
ah,
own.
mm,
I'm grateful for the ability to feed myself with a fork, because not
mm,
everyone has.
mm, mm.
And then the third level, I think, is practicing gratitude for the biggest challenges in your life, the hardest points. And I can give you an example, because that's a little bit hard to comprehend, I guess. Um, it's it's kind of the idea of, how do I take something that could create post-traumatic stress and convert it to post-traumatic growth by asking, what am I supposed to learn here? And so the example I give is, I got divorced 13 years ago, and my now ex-wife was doing some stuff that was really out of pocket, shady, at times illegal.
Okay.
And after a while, after really wrestling with this for some time, I got to a place where I could be grateful for how she behaved during our divorce, because it really taught me to become an expert in emotional management skills.
Okay.
And so she became a teacher.
And so what I'm hearing is you take a hard phase of your life and reframe it in a way that is you see it differently, right? Uh,
Exactly. Yeah,
and
you
and
find meaning in it. You find purpose. You find a lesson.
yeah, and that's the genius way to yeah. I can imagine. It's easier said than done, to be honest. Not.
Well, it takes practice, and it takes repetition. And I think, what we're talking about here largely is managing or controlling, let's say, managing the emotional mind. And the way you do that is largely through repetition.
And it
That's one
was
of the best ways.
a repetition of smaller things, and then
Yeah.
you build that muscle to deal with the
Yeah,
bigger things like
I
this.
think I give you an example. Like, one of my favorite forms of meditation is loving kindness, or metta.
Okay.
And basically it's, think of someone that you love very much and wish kind thoughts upon them. So like, may you be happy, may you be
Uh,
healthy,
uh,
live life with ease and well-being. And then you go from that person to you alone, or sorry, you together, the two of you, wish kind thoughts upon the two of you together. May we be happy. May we be healthy. Then you go to you alone. May I be happy. May I be healthy. And then you can go, there's variations, but you can go to someone that you're having difficulty with, wish kind thoughts upon them. And then you expand it, like, to family, to country, and to world. And at the end, you're wishing kind thoughts upon every living being on the planet. Now, that was the beginning, as I was listening to someone else tell me how to do loving kindness, a guided meditation. Over time, I would just do it on my own. And over time, it just became, I would just think loving thoughts upon myself, ones that I needed, like, may I feel worthy? May I feel worthy of love? May I feel worthy of happiness? May I feel worthy of success? Because I've also found that many of us struggle, if not all of us struggle with self-worth at times. But so it evolved over time. And so it started out as a practice that I needed someone outside of myself telling me what to do. Then it became internalized. And then over time, it just became the way I thought.
And is it correct to say, many people think and actually believe that external validation carries more weight um, rather than internal?
Yeah, I think it's, to me, the move from external validation to internal validation is a hallmark of maturity and evolution,
Okay.
in the sense that when we're young, we're egocentric. We think it's all about us. And we're looking for validation and props and kudos and compliments and likes and high fives from other people. We want them to tell us we're doing a good job, that we're a good person. And that's fine, that's necessary. But it also leaves us open to manipulation. It leaves us open to compromising our own values and beliefs and ideals in order to please others. And so I think that the jump from there to internal validation, which is basically patting yourself on the back when you behave in accordance with your own deeply held values. So values might be family, lifelong learning, physical health, whatever your religion is, maybe that's one of your values. And so when you act in accordance with those, to stop and pause and just go, yeah, all right, John, that was a good job. Like, I'm proud of you for doing it. And that to me means you are a values led man, and you're not bending yourself to in compromise to what other people want and think you should be.
And it makes you more strong than weak, right?
Yes. Oh
Because
yeah. Well, all this does, because and you mentioned something earlier about why men, are men that are kind of scared to go into this because they're afraid of, I don't know, losing control or whatever. But the thing about learning how to manage your emotions, about learning about what you feel, is that unless you do this, I would argue you've got little shot of happiness. I mean, Philippe Golden at Stanford said that emotional management is a foundational hub of happiness. And so it's not so much that we're shooting to be always in a positive emotional state. I mean, I think
obviously.
we'd like to be more frequently in a positive emotional state. We'd like to be happier, but we're not going to be happy, period. And part of that is allowing yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling, to accept it without judgment, so that we can get out of it more quickly and get back to trying to cultivate more frequent positive emotions. So part of the whole idea of happiness, I would argue, I mean, there's meaning and purpose, there's positive relationships, but a big part of it is this emotional management piece, where we learn to accept and hear the messages of all of our emotions. And it's kind of like you learn to surf your emotions as opposed to resisting them. If emotions are waves, you don't want to just stand there and get smashed to bits by the waves. You want to dive under them. You want to learn to surf them. You want to learn to work with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing is, by learning better emotional management skills and better communication skills, it actually greatly increases your chances of having a happy, thriving relationship.
Huh. Hmm. And but I would argue it's a prerequisite of building a healthy relationship, right?
Yeah, except that most of us start really young. We were too young to even, approach some of these ideas. At least I was. I'll speak for for
Fair enough.
myself.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think you speak for most men. So okay, while we're at it, so when it comes to romantic relationships,
Mhm.
what are the biggest mistakes you see most men make emotionally?
Well, we've talked about some of them. I mean, just giving into anger, believing that one of the things that I've done and I've seen other men do is um, getting stuck on the idea of right. And I really like the idea of, would you rather be right or would you rather be married? Or would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Because
Mm.
that anger dynamic takes us to this black and white, all or nothing thinking. And I'm thinking like, I'm all right, you're all wrong.
Mm.
The problem is that's not how relationships work generally. A lot of times the arguments that we get in are about perceptions, and both perceptions can be correct. And so to argue over the correctness of my perception versus your perception, I would argue isn't helpful. And so we've got to get out of this stuck belief of trying to be right. And instead of be right, let's be relational.
Oh,
And here, let me extend that just a second, because the research shows from the Gottmans that 67% of what we argue about in relationship is unresolvable.
okay.
So that means we're just arguing over and over and over again about stuff that we're not taking care of, we're not changing, nothing's different,
Mm.
but we're going to keep arguing about it. And so if that's the case, I would say our best strategy is to learn to truly hear our partner, hear what they're feeling beneath their words, validate how they're feeling, and let's move on from there. Yeah, I get that that's really frustrating to you. I get where that
Mm.
made you feel like you were worth less. I'm sorry about that.
Mm.
That was not my intention.
Mm. I would say many men, not all, but many, uh, do this. They practice this positive way of dealing with situations like this. But there has to be a balance from both sides, right? So a lot of people lose their self-respect when they just
Hmm.
totally give in. They're okay with everything, even when their partner does wrong things, right? And they can sense those things, but they just don't do it. Then what's happening is you're not uh, uh, you're you're not doing the things your values teach you, right? You're not being an actual like man.
Hmm.
Not the wrong concept of man, but a man with principle, with who when sees something wrong, does something about it, right? So, in that kind of situation, how do we make sure that we every most men want to build that relationship, they want to stay
Hmm.
married. We're speaking about married people for this argument. So they want to make their wives happy, keep their wives happy. While doing that, they expect certain things from their wives, right? So, in those cases where there's an unfair treatment, how can they teach them? Um,
Well, so I think it's always a good idea to start with this skill called the soft startup, which is really simple. It's basically just, hey, Mohammed, I've got something important to talk to you about. Is now a good time?
mm,
And so you can start like that with your spouse or your girlfriend, and just you're kind of asking permission and giving them notice. Hey, I've got something important to talk to you about. I need your full attention for this.
okay.
And they're free to say yes or no. If they say no, okay, then when's a good time to talk?
Mm,
Because all too often what we do is we just spew our emotions onto our partner because we can't contain them anymore. Like the first time we see them again after a long day at work, we're just like, bleh.
uh,
That's not a very effective way
mm,
to get into a difficult conversation, because the research shows that as the conversation begins, most often so shall it end. So if it starts in anger, if it starts in accusation, if it starts in vitriol, difficulty, discomfort, it's going to end that way. And the findings for this are very strong. So you want to start it out gently, calmly, as a conversation, not immediately as an accusation and an argument.
mm,
And then you want to bring it up in terms of I statements. So I'm trying to think of what an example could be, because I get what you're saying about a values-based issue, like a serious issue.
mm,
Um, well, let's say overspending, right? Like, let's say
Uh,
your wife overspent on
uh,
something when beyond budget, let's say.
mm,
And you could say, hey, sweetheart, it makes me really nervous and I get scared actually when you spend beyond what we agreed upon for our budget. And I'd really like to talk about ways that we can change this behavior so it doesn't happen again.
mm,
Or if it does happen again, at least you come to me and we can talk about what the purchase is so
mm,
we can agree that this is a worthwhile purchase, even if it is out of budget.
mm, mm, mm. Okay.
That's different from making an accusation and getting angry and calling her names and saying she never
Mm,
listens or,
mm,
whatever the typical fight is.
yeah.
Because we gotta, it's enlightened self-interest, right? It's how can I give my partner the best chance to respond and think about this in a way that gets me what I want,
Mm.
that benefits our relationship.
These are uh, 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 okay. An example. Some your partner has a condition, a cognitive, a mental condition, OCD. Okay.
Okay.
Um, and they do things that are hard on you, right?
Hmm.
The other partner can be a man, can be a woman, right? Husband or wife.
Yes.
Uh, how do you, because you know it's not in their control, they have OCD, right? How do you deal with that?
It's a great question. I mean, it could be ADHD, it could be
Dating.
OCD. Um, and I think one of the ways is to practice depersonalization. So what is depersonalization? It's coming up with interpretations for another person's behavior that have nothing to do with you. So the easiest example I can give is, let's say you're in a new city and you hail a taxi and you get in the taxi and the taxi cab driver's noticeably upset.
Okay.
He's annoyed, he's irritated, and you're thinking, what did I do to this fool to piss him
Hmm.
off?
Hmm.
Right? That's our first thought
Hmm. Hmm.
generally is,
Hmm. Hmm.
what did I do?
Ah.
Why is he doing this to me? We take it personally.
Ah.
So you're not going to stop that, but what you want to do is recover as quickly as you can and play the game of what other interpretations can I come up with to explain his behavior that aren't about me? So, for example, he got a flat tire today at work. He's worried about Uber cutting in on his competition or
Hmm.
his business.
Hmm.
Got in an argument with his wife, has a teenage son that's on drugs, worried
Hmm.
about finances, right? There's all these other possible explanations for his behavior
Hmm.
that have nothing to do with you.
Hmm.
And you can do the same thing with your spouse with the OCD.
Hmm.
Like, oh, this is just her. This is just how she thinks. This isn't about me.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with me. The other thing I think that's helpful, and it takes some safety in the relationship, but I think humor and gentle teasing can
Okay.
help to diffuse that irritation that builds. Um, and that's something that me and my partner do quite a bit. And
Okay.
we've had to make it explicit. Like we've talked about giving each other permission to tease one another.
Okay.
And then we kind of work on it, we practice it. And then I think there's always going to be times when you go too far with that,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
happens, right? And so if
Hmm.
that's the case, you've got to be willing and able to speak up and say, hey, honey, when you said this about, I don't know, about me being late, that was a little bit too far. Like it hurt my feelings a little bit. And to let them know that I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with that.
Hmm. Okay. Okay.
So those are two ideas that come to mind.
Okay. Uh, um, and we can, so just to be clear, we we don't necessarily expect them to change their behavior like uh, uh, instantly or at all, right? So
Well, the behavioral change question is a really good one in the sense of if it's OCD, I'm not expecting that to change a whole lot.
okay.
Maybe really slight improvements, but that's going to be a more ingrained way of thinking. And if ideally they're going to therapy and working on it, and that would be great, because I think their effort is helpful to me to know that they're working on that issue.
Mm,
But behavioral change in general, and we see this a lot in the couples counseling that we do, is like a lot of times one spouse will have this expectation that their partner should change out of annoying or negative behavior like that, like just 180 degrees overnight. But that's not really how behavior change works in humans. I would say it's more like the profile of a jagged mountainside, where, you make some improvement and then you backslide a little bit, and then you make more improvement and then you drop back a little bit. That's more typical. And so I think about change with humans as I'm looking for like 1% change or improvement, ideally every day, but every day might be a little bit fast.
mm,
But it's like changing the course for an oil tanker out at sea, right? It takes a while and it's slow, but if you change an oil tanker's trajectory 2%, over time, the destination that it arrives at is going to be dramatically different
mm,
over 6 months or a year.
mm, mm, mm,
And so I think, to give our partners grace when they are trying to change behavior, particularly if they're doing it for us in the relationship,
mm,
to know that there's going to be backslides and
mm,
regressions because we're dealing with emotions generally.
mm,
And then, give them that grace and that compassion because, again, it's enlightened self-interest. What do you want them to do? You want
mm,
them to change the behavior.
mm,
If you jump on them at their first backslide, is that motivating them to keep going?
mm,
No.
mm.
So, you want to encourage them, catch them being good, catch them making the changes
Yeah,
you want made, and then, have grace and forgiveness when they fall short.
yeah. And this would take us back to self-awareness as well, and building your personal traits. Like, for example, you'd have to be a lot patient to deal with
Uh-huh.
situation like, right? So
Yeah.
so we'd have to train ourselves for that as well. So thank you for this. Because I've met over time, I've met a lot of and younger like people in their early 20s and late teens. They have a fairy tale mind where they want to
Uh-huh.
build a relationship, and ideally I would say it's a great way of thinking that they want their first relationship to be the last,
Uh-huh.
and they want to learn these things. So as you said, yeah, maturity, you don't get that maturity at that stage, but yeah,
Yeah.
if somebody can, we should help them, right? So these conversations actually help those people as well. So thank you for this.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the age that we live in, right? If you're young and you want to learn these skills, you can pull up a podcast and
Yeah,
begin to learn this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
And it's free.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, yeah, but so there is no excuse these days. You have everything very quality education available,
Mhm.
and what I like about these setups is experience. It's not just
Mhm.
literature. It's 30 years
Yes.
of experience as well that we're getting in this, and very grateful for this. Again, thank you so much. Really
You are most
appreciate
welcome.
this. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on towards how do we redefine strength and leadership, like from the inside out?
Well, I think emotional management is a big part of it.
Okay.
Figuring out what do you feel, how do you deal with it, how do you deal with it effectively. I think mindfulness is a part of that because it leads to presence. And one of the big keys to leadership is being present with people around you and not, well, having some ability to manage your own mind so that it's not always pulling you into a negative past or a negative future, but you can actually be here in the present moment with me is a big deal. Um, I think physical health is part of that, taking the best care that we can of this, 5-layer meat sack that we've been gifted for this time around on Earth. And I think, integrity, values, ethics, doing what you say, saying what you do is a big part of that as well.
And if we if you were to define healthy masculinity, okay,
Mhm.
how would you see that man? If what does he do that there's a young man who is like who shows all the characteristics of healthy masculinity? What is he doing?
That's a big question, but I would say, one of the positive traits of masculinity is sense of humor.
Okay.
And I think, part of that, you got to define sense of humor a little bit, right? Like if my sense of humor is just making fun of other people and attacking their weak spots,
Mm,
that's not cool.
mm,
That's not strength.
mm,
That's insecurity masquerading as strength. And so I think sense of humor where, it's witty, it's quick. You can make fun of society, perhaps yourself, or make fun of, sometimes we can tease other people and we know we can play with them, like we have permission.
Mm.
Um, but sense of humor is a big part of positive masculinity. I would say physical strength. I would say resiliency. I think self-reliance is a big part of that to a point. I think being the provider is a big part of healthy masculinity
Mm.
to a point. I've seen too many men get lost in their ego, the ego around work, and that they're respected, they're admired, they know what's expected of them, they get accolades at work, but then too much of their time, attention, and energy is spent at work, and meanwhile they're neglecting the loved ones back home.
Ah,
So it's a balancing act.
yeah.
Um, I think ethics, integrity, values is a big part of it. Um, Emotional intelligence, communication skills. I don't know. Those are the ones that come to mind. I
Okay.
probably missed a few.
You covered my next two questions, so I'm gonna skip that. So thank you. Because in my and what I'm trying to do with this podcast as well is to balance. In my opinion, it's that's the key. You know, you can earn all the money in the world, and if you're not emotionally available for your family, you
Right.
you're not living a balanced life, right?
Hmm.
Fulfilling life, you're not living that. And yeah, if you have a good relationship and yeah, you're broke as hell, you're not doing anything to earn money, it will over time, you'll ruin your relationships as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Aristotle had it to your point of, he said moderation is the key
Oh.
to a happier life. And I mean, think of like one of the ways that we're socialized as men is compete, to be competitive.
Yeah.
And I'm all for competing
Hmm.
to a point. So again, if you think about that on a 1 to 10 scale, what's the context in which we're competing? So in other words, if you're out playing cricket or soccer or football or rugby,
Yeah.
like, okay, cool, be traditionally masculine. Like that works. Like compete, give it your best, ignore pain, be a badass, all that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're highly competitive, and a lot of men that I've worked with over the years are, then be aware of that trait when you start to get into an argument with your girlfriend or wife
Hmm.
or partner,
Hmm.
because I've had elite athletes that get into knockdown, drag out fights with their spouses.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so how competitive are you on a 1 to 10 scale? And they're
Hmm.
like, I'm an 11. Okay,
Hmm.
cool. How competitive are you in the arguments with your wife?
Hmm.
Oh, I'm really competitive.
Hmm.
Why?
Hmm.
Like, it's not the same context. There's
Yeah.
no right here. And you're looking to die on that hill to prove you're right,
Hmm.
but that's not serving your relationship. And so
Yeah.
you might want to consider dialing back the competitiveness in that context.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking about these behaviors and traits and abilities in terms of context.
Hmm.
Because I've had, guys in interviews say, well, it sounds like you're arguing for the wussification of men.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, no, that's not what I'm arguing for at all. I'm arguing for having full access to different parts of our humanity
Hmm.
and our emotional being so that we can access them in the context so that we best support those around us and ourselves.
Hmm.
So as I said, if you're going to go out and play rugby, cool, be traditionally masculine, that
Hmm.
works.
Hmm.
But if you're on date night with your spouse,
Hmm.
we need a different set of skills. We need to be better at communication. We need to
Yeah.
be more empathetic and more understanding and a better listener.
Yeah.
If we're, helping our 2-year-old daughter who just fell and skinned her knee, that's a different set of skills. We need to be gentle and quiet and patient and loving and nurturing.
Yeah.
And so I want men to have access to all those parts of themselves because they were all in us at one
Yeah.
point. And they're still there. We've just walked away from most of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of society, right?
Yeah.
And one just something came to my mind: the importance of uh, compromise. Is that a bad thing? Compromise.
Um, Compromise. I think it depends on the context. I think it depends on the situation. I think compromise in general is
Hmm.
a good goal,
Hmm.
especially if we're talking about, that 67% of issues that we argue about that are
Hmm.
unresolvable.
Hmm.
Let's come to a compromise. Let's find a middle ground.
Hmm.
Um, So yeah, in general, I think it's a good goal. I'm stalling because I'm trying to think of where compromise might not be beneficial, and I can't come up with anything right now.
So let's just say I'll give you a context where you have to make decisions for your home, your family, and you collide. You know, your ideas collide, you and your partners, and then you have to make a decision, right? So, what do you do? Both, maybe sometimes it's middle ground, but sometimes you just can't come to a middle ground. You one of the parties have to compromise, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe put a lot of trust in the other person, like more than they would care to do in that context, right? So would that be a fair thing to do, or in this context?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of like a disagreement between husband and wife over purchasing a new car,
Okay.
right? Like typically the husband wants to save money. He's like, let's just take the car and
Yeah.
get it repaired, the
Hmm.
old car.
Hmm.
It's fine. It's only got 200,000 miles on it. It's only 12 years old, something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
And the wife's like, no, I don't feel safe in this car. I need a new car.
Yeah.
I don't want it breaking down on me. And so I think we could also get to what are the emotions driving the arguments
Hmm.
beneath that. I mean, he's probably anxious about finances.
Hmm.
She's anxious about and scared about personal health and safety that,
Hmm.
she's going to get stranded somewhere, which is understandable.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think you could, it depends on, you can compromise a couple ways. One is get a less expensive new car. One is repair the car with the agreement that we'll get a new car in whatever, 3 months, 6 months, whatever you agree
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
The other way you could go is, let's go with my decision this time, and we'll go with your decision on the next major
Ah.
issue.
So maybe we can say more than compromise, we can say better communication is
Yeah.
huh? You can come to
Yeah,
it.
because it's really what are the emotions drive to
Yeah.
me, what are the emotions
Yeah.
driving your position on this issue? And if we can speak to that, that usually helps.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Let's wrap up with a few quick fire questions
Okay.
to bring out the personal side of your work. Okay. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. What's one lesson you learned the hard way about masculinity?
That I was dealing with shame even into my 50s. I didn't think that was an issue for me. And I found out it was coming out in disagreements with my partner. And I was like, holy smokes, like I never dreamt I still was dealing with shame. But once I had the awareness, then I could deal with it. I could go after it.
Amazing. And yeah, again, self awareness would be the answer
Yeah.
to this, right? Okay.
Mhm.
A book or quote that shaped how you show up in relationships.
There's a bunch. I mean, there's a bunch by Terry Real. There's a bunch by John Gottman. Um, there's a great one by Lindsay Gibson called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Um, yeah, there's a whole library of books for
Beautiful
that.
title. I can imagine. I can imagine.
It's a
Uh,
brilliant book. I don't read most books cover to cover. That one I read cover to cover twice.
I'm gonna buy that one. Sounds amazing. Okay, a simple daily practice you swear by.
Uh, Loving Kindness. Uh, it's one of my favorite. Great research to back it up too.
Okay, what would your 25-year-old self be shocked to see you doing today?
Um, Hosting two podcasts and doing podcasts around the world, doing interviews around the world.
Amazing. Something that I don't do a lot, but yes, sometimes I surprise people with this question. So you have to say something about yourself to yourself, what you're proud of.
What I'm proud of.
You have to say it to yourself.
I am I'm proud of you for having the courage to engage in this. Basically, what's a war on two different types of masculinity, because it takes courage, and you've done well in that regard.
Nice, nice, beautiful, beautiful. And same thing for the person you love the most.
I am really proud and appreciative of the efforts you have made to look at yourself and change for the betterment of our relationship.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And finally, to the young man listening who feels angry, misunderstood, or emotionally stuck. What's the first step you tell him to take toward becoming a more grounded, evolved man?
The first step is to, like, I get why you're angry. I get why you feel stuck. I get why you're frustrated. Like, that's normal. It's a normal response to an abnormal world.
Mm,
And so to start from that place, that your emotions make sense, and they're telling you messages. They're telling you something needs to change.
mm,
That what you're doing, the way you're doing it, has to change. And so first step would be, start listening to podcasts, start looking for ways to become more self-aware, get out of your head, get into your body, start being curious about what you feel and what you think, start challenging those thoughts in your head that don't serve you, because half the thoughts in your head are complete and utter lies.
mm,
And so your job is to become an expert at discerning which thoughts are telling you the truth and
mm,
which thoughts are full of shit.
mm.
Because just because it's in your head doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah,
That your thoughts can and do lie to you.
yeah,
That's
amazing.
kind of a good jumping off point.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you, Dr. John, for showing us that masculinity doesn't have to mean silence, pressure, or pretending. It can mean mean strength, right? Through
Yes.
emotional mastery, emotional regulation. It can mean connection without control.
Mhm.
And to every man listening, the work starts now. You've had you've heard some great examples and ways to deal with different situations in different contexts. So I'm pretty sure you take away a lot from this episode. So we'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for tuning in.